Joining Clay in studio in D.C. is Senator Hagerty of the great state of Tennessee. Senator, appreciate you coming in and hanging out. Sorry, Clay couldn't put a tie on for you, but I don't know if I don't think he actually owns a tie.
I'm trying to avoid all ties, but we were talking off air. The senator's got a couple of kids who are away in college. Our kids are at the same school in Nashville, have been. It's a fabulous school. And I'm up here right now visiting schools with my 16-year-old. So that's why I'm
Great.
in a T-shirt and shorts. We've been running around. It's warm. It's nice.
Following his father's footsteps, too. He comes back to Washington.
Could be true. We'll see exactly how that goes. But you were just telling us off air, you have been talking with Donald Trump quite a lot about, as we get closer, a little bit under 5 months from the election. What can you tell us about how the president's doing, how you think the campaign's going, and also you're in the Senate. How close do you think, and what would you say the status is of taking back control of the Senate as you sort of survey the election?
Can I start with that question first,
Yeah.
and we'll get to the president? With respect to the United States Senate, I think most of our listeners know this, but every 2 years, a third of the Senate comes up for re-election. 34, 33 seats are up every 2 years. This time, the Democrats are defending 23 seats. Republicans have obviously a 2-to-1 advantage there in terms of how thin the resources will be spread by Democrats. They always have more money, but they'll be spread across more states. 3 of those are Democrats serving in Republican states. And in a presidential election year, it's going to be very tough for these Democrats, as people would hope perhaps that they could get in an off year with a lower turnout, that they might be able to pull the wool over the electorate's eyes, get a high turnout out of their base. I don't know what the case may be, but this is going to be a high turnout election, and we're going to not take anything for granted. But I really do believe we've got a real advantage. We're right now 49 Republicans to 51 Democrats. Joe Manchin's already dropped out. He knows there's no path to victory for him in West Virginia. Jim Justice will be our next senator from West Virginia. That takes us to 50-50 right there. We're then looking at Montana. We're looking at Ohio, Pennsylvania, Nevada. You keep going. Michigan, Wisconsin, get a little bit further out of reach. Arizona, real possibility for us there. But I think there's a great chance that we're going to pick up several seats in the Senate. We will take control back. The betting markets and certainly the polls have us taking it back, but I'm not taking anything for granted. With respect to the presidential race, I think the presidential race and the House races will actually move in the same direction. And there, as I said, I was speaking with the president just yesterday about this. Our momentum is absolutely moving in the right direction. If you look at the betting markets right now, Donald Trump is the odds-on favorite. The Economist does a type of survey where they take into account not only polling data, but history, right track, wrong track, and how those sorts of measures tend to manifest themselves in an election. And they have Donald Trump with 2-to-1 odds relative to Biden in terms of winning. Donald Trump's got 2 out of 3, and Joe Biden's got only 1 out of 3 odds of winning this fall. So all of this says we need to be very prepared for what's going to happen. We need to be ready to go on day one. Whomever wins this election will have only 4 years ahead of them. And the first 100 days, I think, are going to be absolutely critical to regaining our nation's economic capacity, to securing our nation with the disaster at the southern border and all the crime that's happening in our cities, the national security crises that Joe Biden has created literally around the world. The world is on fire right now thanks to their ill-founded policies and their instincts, which all seem to be wrong. They seem to want to appease and show weakness at every point. We should be showing American strength. That's going to change day one when Donald Trump comes in. And I just left a meeting in the Senate where we're talking about the reconciliation process, which is a budgetary tool that will be used early on in the first months of the new Congress, which will correspond to the arrival of a new executive. And we need to be deeply aligned on the legislative side. We need every Republican on board supporting us implementing President Trump's agenda. I have a feeling the mandate for President Trump's going to become very clear on Election Day, and we need to be ready on the legislative branch side, as well as I know the president's team is getting executive orders ready to undo some of the massive damage that Joe Biden has done to America.
Senator Hagerty with us from Tennessee, but in D.C. Senator, we didn't report on this on the show, but the Democrats, I believe, were certainly celebrating on their side that 200 federal judges have gotten through the Senate through confirmation and put on the federal bench under Biden. Are you concerned about the kind of nominees that are currently getting through? And do you feel like that heightens the need for Republicans to be able to, no matter what, let's say even if Biden were to win the presidency, to slow down what seems to be a radicalizing judiciary under Biden's time?
Well, Buck, you hit the nail on the head. I think this will be one of Chuck Schumer. Hopefully, his only point of pride is bringing in the most radical appointees to the federal bench that we've ever seen. The way it works in the Senate for what they call executive calendar appointments is that rather than a 60 vote threshold, which is what we have for legislation, there's only a 50+1 threshold for these appointees. Schumer has the votes. And so we push back hard at every turn. They put some absolutely terrible nominees forward, people without relevant experience, people that have no business in the courtroom. They don't have any, in any capacity. They couldn't be in front of a judge. Why in the world are they going to be behind the bench? But that's where they're moving, because the credentials they're looking for are radical credentials, or they're just looking for some type of demographic credential that they can pat themselves in the back about accomplishing. But competence seems to be the lowest tick mark on that list, Buck. Competence seems to be the last thing considered. It's everything else from ideology to demographics that seem to be driving that process. Chuck Schumer learned his lesson from Mitch McConnell. If you go back to the previous Trump administration, President Trump and Leader McConnell worked on putting a lot of strong conservative judges into the judiciary, and Chuck Schumer learned from that playbook. They're doing the same thing. I think it will continue to be a key element of strategy. Depending on which party controls the Senate, they'll be focused on that very much.
You have a great relationship with Donald Trump. You served in the administration. I've been around you and President Trump. He is incredibly complimentary of you. I saw in the New York Times, granted, we know that the New York Times doesn't always have things 100% right.
That's often the case.
I saw that you are a vice presidential candidate, according to the New York Times. It would not surprise me at all, based on what I have seen Trump say about you and the relationship. Have you talked about the vice presidency at all? Would that be something that you were interested in if Trump came to you and said, as I know he does, I really trust your opinion, I think you could help us get over the finish line? What kind of conversations have there been?
Here's what I want to say first and foremost. The most critical thing for this nation right now is that Donald Trump win in November. And the last thing he needs is a sideshow, a bunch of folks auditioning for a job. He needs to be able to focus entirely on getting elected, and whatever will help him in terms of the VP pick will increase his chances and odds the greatest of winning that election. That's the outcome I want in terms of the vice presidential selection process. It's certainly a compliment to find your name on these lists, but I can tell you I've no intention of engaging in speculation. I'll let the speculators do that. My job has been, is going to continue to be, to carry on the momentum. I'm the only member of his administration that's in the United States Senate. I have been advocating from day one of arriving there for the policies that President Trump so successfully implemented and had on the books to move forward. So President Trump knows he's got a very strong ally in me in any capacity. And right now my focus is making certain that we are going to be ready on day one in the United States Senate to incorporate and deliver on the types of policy changes that are absolutely necessary to get our economy back, to get our national security back, to rebuild our military, and again, have foreign relations that actually advantage America rather than every one of our adversaries. I was asking the president literally just yesterday, who has won under under Joe Biden's policies? And the hands-down winner every time you ask the question is generally China. And the next best the next best off tend to be Iran, Russia, and all of our adversaries combined. Those are the biggest winners under Joe Biden's policy, whether it's the war he's waged on domestic energy that it essentially has allowed energy prices to go up around the world and allowed us to inadvertently fund Russia's war on Ukraine. Their refusal to impose, or I should say enforce, the sanctions that are on Iran. I worked very hard to get those sanctions in place when I served in the Trump administration. They immediately stopped enforcing them, and we saw Iran's reserves go from single-digit billions all the way up to triple-digit billions under Joe Biden, and they've used those funds to just basically dismantle peace in the Middle East. They funded Hamas, they fund Hezbollah, they're funding the Houthis right now, shutting down the Red Sea. Every place you look, we have disasters that benefit our adversaries. Those are the only winners under the Biden administration's policies, our adversaries.
Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. We got Senator Hagerty still with us, and we kept talking during the commercial break. And I wanted to give you an opportunity because we're talking to 500 stations all over the country. And you were talking in the last segment about the battlegrounds in the Senate. Montana, certainly Ohio, West Virginia is looking good. But so much of this, and you and I talked about this right after the 2022 disappointment. You're a data guy. People don't know this. You worked in tech. You had a business success before you came into the political arena. And you said in our conversations, we just got to dive into the data and figure out why Democrats are doing a better job getting their people out than we are. What is going to change in your mind with that data, and how can you use it to get, not only for the presidential race, but in particular in the Senate, as you mentioned, red state Montana, red state Ohio, red state West Virginia, and then Nevada and Pennsylvania, and you look at that data, how do you get those voters out? What has changed since 22 based on what you've seen?
Just for context, Clay and Buck, is it on?
I think we've got the let's see if it's that one over there.
Yeah, this one's live.
Yeah, that one's the
Sorry
live
about
one.
that. Sorry about the guys.
So I just asked you, what is the data? How are things improving to be able to make a difference in 24 compared to 22?
Sure. Here's how I got at the data. In 2022, we had a result that was quite contrary to what I thought because I was looking at the polling data close to the election. My background, I started out at a place called the Boston Consulting Group, very analytically oriented. We basically went back and looked at each state and tried to figure out what caused us to lose.
Reverse engineered the results.
Exactly. And what we found varied. The means varied by every state, but what we found is that we were beaten on the ground. Exhibit A would be Pennsylvania. There you had John Fetterman, who had amassed over 900,000 early votes before he ever had to come up against Dr. Oz. Terrible debate, as you know. The most Googled question in Pennsylvania for the week that followed was, how do I change my vote? Well, you can't. Dr. Oz wins by 400,000 votes on Election Day, but that's not enough to overcome the 700,000 vote margin that Fetterman had. That's sort of Exhibit A to me to say we've got to have a ground game in place that's commensurate with what the Democrats have. So we have been very focused on those states where we think it's going to be close. And what we're trying to do is get low proclivity voters. These are people that vote 1, 2, maybe even 3 out of 4 of the last elections, Republican voters, to turn out. And the Sentinel Action Fund is the group that I've been sort of adding leadership to. But the Sentinel Action Fund has teams on the ground that are focused in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio. I mean, we will go to others, but focused on getting early ballot requests out, getting people on the absentee ballot rolls if that's what gets them to vote, requesting their early ballots if that's what's necessary in the state. It all depends on varying state rules, and helping people. Ballot harvesting is allowed, for example, in some states. The Democrats have mastered that. We've got to play by those same set of rules, even if we don't like it. We certainly can't be caught, without an ability to step up and match what the Democrats are doing. So that has been my focus. The outcome may be only a 2, 3, 4% difference, but in some of these states that are very close, Clay, that could make all the difference in the world.
Do you think, Senator Hagerty, this legal stuff that we're seeing? I mean, there's so much of it, right? The 4 cases against Trump, 1 completed now with the indictment, the Hunter Biden guilty verdict. Do you think any of this really matters in the places where the election is going to be decided, either for control of the Senate or for the presidency?
Well, in terms of polling numbers, we may not see a massive bump for the president, but in terms of enthusiasm on our side, it's through the roof, Clay. It's through the roof, Buck. The enthusiasm that's come forward. Americans don't want to see their country moving down this path. I don't care if you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican. They know what happened in New York was wrong. The weaponization of the judicial system is wrong. And I think they know next up could be one of us. So it's something that has absolutely motivated the base. You look at the fundraising numbers, and Buck, you ask about the change. There's been a tidal wave of financial support for President Trump, over $400 million just since that verdict was delivered. This is going to give us the resources. It will definitely impact the election, not the way Joe Biden had hoped it would. It's backfiring on the Democrats, and I think what it's going to do is just carry a massive wave of enthusiasm throughout the country, and it's going to help in the effort I just described to get people to turn out early and vote.
You know Asia well. How concerned are you? You mentioned that China is the big winner of the Biden administration. How concerned are you that China could invade Taiwan when they see Biden's weakness, based on your experience in the Asian Pacific region?
Clay, as usual, you always target the very real concerns, and that's one I think that we're all deeply concerned about. China continues to build its military capacity. The United States has made some great press releases about what we're doing in the region, but we've got to actually be serious about it. You've got a Pentagon right now that's working on its pronouns. You've got Joe Biden that is attacked one of our greatest sources of geopolitical strength. That's our energy industry. We should be delivering LNG throughout the whole Southeast Asia region and pushing back. Instead, we're standing there idly watching China buy every bit of energy they can from Russia and from Iran and enriching our adversaries. So I think the concern is great about what China can do. They've benefited a great deal from these bad policies, and we need to be on the lookout.
Senator Hagerty, Buck with us. This is pretty awesome.